November 12, 1942. 300 miles west of Ireland, North Atlantic. The merchantman SS Empire Moonbeam lurches violently to port as Commander Thomas Hendricks grips the bridge railing, his knuckles white against the painted steel. Ice-cold spray crashes over the bow, and through the pre-dawn murk, he can count only 17 shadows of the 43 ships that left Liverpool 6 days ago. Each silhouette represents 10,000 tons of steel, grain, ammunition, and fuel, the lifeblood pumping toward a Britain slowly starving under blockade. Explosion off starboard quarter. The lookout's voice cracks with exhaustion. It's the Margaret Ann. Hendricks doesn't need binoculars to see the orange fireball mushrooming 300 yards away. The American Liberty, ship loaded with aviation fuel and aircraft parts, erupts in a column of flame that turns night into day. The shockwave hits seconds later, rattling every rivet in Empire Moonbeam's hull. Hendricks watches the ship's back break, her bow and stern rising like the jaws of some dying sea monster before she slides beneath the black water. 70 seconds from torpedo strike to final disappearance.
Noli febwats. No survivors.
41 men gone. That makes 6 ships tonight. Where's our bloody escort? First Officer Davies stands beside him, voice hoarse from shouting orders through 14 hours of attacks. HMS Vervain is chasing a contact to the north. Saxifrage is picking up survivors from the Atlantic Merchant. We've got 1 corvette for 43 ships, Davies. 1. The mathematics are brutally simple. Convoy HX-217 departed with a single destroyer and 2 corvettes, 3 escort vessels for 43 merchantmen spread across 15 square miles of ocean. The Wolf Pack found them on day 4. Now, in the early morning hours of day 6, Admiral Karl Donit's grey wolves circle in the darkness, their commanders calling targeting coordinates to each other, coordinating attacks that the undermanned escorts cannot possibly prevent. Another explosion, portside this time. The Norwegian tanker Ringstad. Hendricks watches crude oil spread across the water's surface, igniting in a carpet of flame that illuminates the scattered convoy. In that terrible light, he can see the other merchantmen zigzagging desperately, each captain making his own decisions, the neat columns of the convoy formation long since abandoned for individual survival. Signal from Vervain, sir. The radio operator emerges from the wireless room, message slip trembling in his hand. Another U-boat contact. She's breaking off to engage. Hendricks nods slowly. The young lieutenant commander aboard Vervain is doing everything right, chasing down every sonar contact, dropping depth charges, trying to keep the U-boats at bay. But it's like trying to guard a flock of sheep with a single sheepdog while wolves attack from every direction. The escorts run themselves ragged, steaming from one side of the convoy to the other while the merchantmen lumber forward at 8 knots, each ship burning more fuel than Hendricks cares to think about. All ahead full, he orders. Get us closer to the center of the formation. It's instinct, this desire to crowd together with the other ships. Safety in numbers, every captain thinks. But the convoys keep getting smaller Admiralty orders. 3 months ago, HX-217 would have sailed with 70 ships and 6 escorts. Now they're running convoys of 40 or fewer, spreading the available escorts across more sailings. The theory, explained to Hendricks by a staff officer in Liverpool, is that smaller convoys are harder to find and can be better protected by fewer escorts. The theory isn't working. 1,100 miles east, London. The same morning, Professor Patrick Blackett stares at the map of the North Atlantic covering the entire wall of the operations room in Derby House. Red pins mark confirmed U-boat positions. Black pins mark suspected contacts. And blue pins, there are too many blue pins mark the locations where merchant ships have gone down in the past 90 days. The pattern is unmistakable to anyone who knows how to look. The blue pins cluster along the convoy routes like punctuation marks in a sentence written in blood and oil. Each pin represents not just a ship, but the cargo it carried: tanks that will never reach the desert, aircraft that will never fly, food that will never arrive, and men who will never come home. 711 ships since January, says Commander Richard Wynne, leaning against the plotting table. His uniform jacket hangs loose on his frame. Everyone in Derby House has lost weight this year. Sleep is a luxury measured in minutes. 800,000 tons last month alone. At this rate. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. Everyone in this room can do the arithmetic. Britain imports 50 million tons of goods annually. The U-boats are sinking ships faster than the shipyards can replace them. There's a word for what happens when an island nation loses the ability to import food and fuel. Defeat. Blackett moves closer to the map. At 55, he looks older than his years. The Nobel Prize he won in 1948, no, that hasn't happened yet, he reminds himself with bitter humor. Right now he's just a physicist who traded cosmic rays and cloud chambers for operations research and casualty statistics. The transition has been jarring. In physics, when your theory doesn't match experimental results, you revise the theory. In war, when your tactics don't work, people die. The escorts are doing everything right, Wynne continues. Aggressive prosecution of contacts, coordinated sweeps, improved ASDIC. But we're spread too thin. We've been running smaller convoys, trying to reduce the target profile. More sailings, fewer ships per sailing, same number of escorts distributed across dash. Show me the actual numbers, Blackett interrupts, his Cambridge accent cutting through Wynne's briefing. Not the casualties. The convoy compositions. Ships per convoy, escorts per convoy, over the past 12 months. Wynne pulls a folder from the stack on the table. January through March 1942, average convoy size was 6 to 7 ships with 4 to 6 escorts. April through June, 54 ships with 3 to 5 escorts. July through September, 48 ships with 2 to 4 escorts. Current operations, 35 to 45 ships with 1 to 3 escorts. And the loss rates? Increasing steadily. January to March, 6% of ships in attacked convoys lost. April to June, 8%. July to September, 11%. October and November to date, 14%. Blackett pulls out his pocket notebook, a habit from his physics days. He starts writing figures, his pen scratching across the page. Wynne watches him work, recognizing the intense concentration. Blackett has been doing this for weeks now, requesting data, analyzing patterns, filling notebooks with calculations that nobody else in Derby House fully understands. The Admiralty believes smaller convoys are more defensible, Wynne says carefully. Fewer ships means a smaller footprint, harder for U-boats to detect, and the same number of escorts can cover the formation more effectively. The Admiralty is wrong. Blackett doesn't look up from his calculations. Catastrophically wrong. The statement hangs in the air. Outside, the morning watch is changing at the Admiralty. Inside this basement operations room, lit by harsh electric lights and filled with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and burned coffee, a physicist is suggesting that the Royal Navy's entire tactical doctrine for convoy operations is backwards. I need more data, Blackett says finally. Every convoy sailing for the past 18 months. Composition, escort strength, route, weather conditions, and outcomes. Ships lost versus ships arrived. I need the numbers for convoys that weren't attacked as well as those that were. And I need casualty breakdown, ships sunk versus ships damaged, location of ships in formation when hit, time of day for attacks. That will take days to compile. Then we'd better start now, Commander, because ships are dying out there every hour we waste. Wynne nods slowly. He's spent enough time with Blackett to recognize that look. The professor isn't operating on intuition or theory anymore. He's seen something in the patterns, some mathematical relationship that the Navy's traditional tactical thinking has missed entirely. There's resistance, Wynne warns, to operational research in general, and to civilians telling the Navy how to fight in particular. Admiral Horton is more open-minded than most, but even he has limits. If you're going to challenge convoy doctrine, you'll need ironclad proof. I'll have it. Blackett closes his notebook and looks up at the wall map. His eyes trace the convoy routes, the hunting grounds of the U-boat packs, the terrible geometry of the Atlantic killing ground. The mathematics are actually quite elegant, Commander. The Navy has been making a fundamental error in its assumption about surface area and detection probability. We've been thinking about this problem incorrectly from the start. Can you fix it? Blackett meets his gaze. If I'm right, we can cut losses by 50% in a matter of months. But first I need to prove it, and then I need to convince men who've spent their lives at sea that a physicist with a slide rule knows more about convoy tactics than they do. He turns back to the map, already mentally organizing the analysis, planning the presentation, anticipating the objections. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of the North Atlantic, another convoy is steaming into danger. Another commander is watching the horizon for periscopes and torpedo wakes. Another set of merchant sailors is about to learn whether they'll see tomorrow. The mathematics won't save them. Not tonight. But if Blackett can make the Navy listen, if he can overcome institutional resistance and doctrinal inertia, if he can translate his calculations into changes in tactics, then maybe, just maybe, fewer pins will mark the map next month. November 18th, 1942. Derby House, Liverpool. The conference room table disappears beneath a sea of papers. Convoy reports, casualty lists, weather logs, U-boat position estimates 18 months of Atlantic warfare reduced to statistics and type summaries. Blackett hasn't slept in 36 hours. His shirt collar is unbuttoned, his tie discarded somewhere around R20. 3 other members of his operational research team work alongside him. 2 mathematicians borrowed from Cambridge and a statistician who was calculating insurance actuarial tables before the war made him calculate something far more grim. Pattern confirmed, says Dr. James Williams, pushing his spectacles up his nose as he examines a spreadsheet. Convoy SC-107, October 30th, 42 ships, 2 escorts. 15 ships lost. Convoy ON-144, November 5th, 33 ships, 3 escorts. 13 ships lost. But look at this convoy HX-209, September 12th, 57 ships, 4 escorts. 2 ships lost despite 6 days of attacks. Blackett circles the figures. His hand is steady despite the exhaustion, the numbers taking shape into something larger than mere statistics. Each digit represents a test of his hypothesis, and the pattern is becoming undeniable. The Admiralty reduced convoy sizes based on geometric reasoning, Blackett says, speaking as much to himself as to his team. They assumed that a smaller convoy presents a smaller target, less surface area for U-boats to detect. Therefore, harder to find. Logical, if you're thinking in 2 dimensions. He stands and walks to the blackboard mounted on the wall. His chalk squeaks as he draws a circle. Here's a convoy. 40 ships arranged in a formation roughly circular in profile. Now, the Admiralty's logic, split this into 2 convoys of 20 ships each. He draws 2 smaller circles. Each convoy has half the ships, therefore roughly 70% of the diameter, therefore this is their assumption, 70% of the detection probability. Williams nods slowly, following the reasoning. But that's not what matters, Blackett continues, drawing faster now, the physicist in him coming alive with the explanation. Detection probability isn't the relevant variable. The U-boats are finding the convoys regardless. Look at the data detection rates for large and small convoys are virtually identical. The weather matters. The route matters. But size?
No correlation.
He taps the chalk against the board. What matters is what happens after detection. The number of escorts relative to the perimeter they must defend. And this is where the mathematics become beautiful. The chalk moves rapidly across the board. A convoy's perimeter grows with the square root of the number of ships. Double the ships, and the perimeter increases by only 40%. But here's what the Admiralty missed. Most ships aren't on the perimeter. They're inside the formation. Williams leans forward. So a larger convoy has proportionally fewer vulnerable ships on the edges. Exactly. And more than that, the escorts can maintain closer spacing around a single large convoy than they can around multiple small ones. One convoy of 60 ships with 4 escorts means 1 escort every 3 miles of perimeter. 2 convoys of 30 ships with 2 escorts each means 1 escort every 4 miles of perimeter. Wider gaps. More opportunity for U-boats to penetrate. Blackett draws attack vectors on the diagram. A U-boat penetrates the screen. In a small convoy, she has immediate access to most of the formation. High probability of hitting multiple ships before the escorts can respond. In a large convoy, she penetrates only the outer edge. Most ships remain protected by the sheer depth of the formation. The statistician, Peter Crawford, speaks up from the corner where he's been cross-referencing reports. Professor, I have the numbers you requested. Comparing convoys of 30 to 40 ships versus convoys of 55 to 70 ships, controlling for number of escorts and route. And small convoys, average loss rate when attacked is 12.8%. Large convoys with the same escort ratio, 5.7%. The room falls silent. Everyone understands what those numbers mean. Not theory. Not hypothesis. Evidence. More than half, Williams breathes. We could cut losses by more than half just by increasing convoy size. Blackett nods grimly. And that's assuming the same total number of escorts. But there's an additional benefit. Currently we're running more frequent, smaller convoys. More sailings means more escorts tied up in transit, fewer available for other duties. Consolidate into larger convoys, and we free up escorts for training, refit, and reinforcement of the convoys that do sail. He turns back to the board, adding more calculations. The square-cube law applies here just as it does in physics. Volume, or in this case, the number of ships inside a defensive perimeter increases faster than surface area. It's the same principle that explains why large animals are proportionally harder to cool than small ones. Why a mouse needs to eat proportionally more than an elephant. The mathematics are fundamental. Crawford is flipping through reports, his expression darkening. Professor, if this is correct, we've been doing exactly the wrong thing for nearly a year. Yes. Ships that didn't need to die. Yes. Blackett's voice is flat. Thousands of merchant seamen. Millions of tons of cargo. All lost because we applied the wrong mathematical model to convoy defense. The Admiralty saw a smaller target and assumed it would be safer. They never calculated the relationship between perimeter and interior, never considered the geometric efficiency of concentration. Williams removes his spectacles and rubs his eyes. The Navy won't want to hear this. The Navy will have to hear this. Blackett drops the chalk and faces his team. Because out there, right now, men are dying based on flawed tactical doctrine. We have the data. We have the proof. And we have a moral obligation to make them listen. November 21st, 1942. Mid-Atlantic. Lieutenant Commander Harold Watson stands on the bridge of HMS Vervain, watching another convoy scatter in the darkness. This is his third convoy this month, and the pattern is grimly familiar. The merchantmen sail in loose formation, 38 ships spread across the ocean like sheep without a shepherd. His corvette and her sister ship Saxifrage race between them, Azdic pinging into the depths, trying to establish a sonar barrier that 3 U-boats can easily circumvent. Contact bearing 275, range 1800 yards. Watson grabs the voice pipe. Full ahead. Hard to starboard. Prepare depth charges. Vervain heels over as her engines surge to full power. The corvette is fast for her size but not fast enough. By the time they reach the contact, the U-boat will have dived deep or sprinted away on the surface, using her superior speed to relocate and attack from a different angle. The familiar crack of a torpedo explosion echoes across the water. Not close, maybe 2 miles away on the convoy's port flank. That's where Saxifrage is stationed, but she can't be everywhere at once. The mathematics are simple and brutal. 2 escorts cannot adequately screen 38 ships spread across 12 square miles of ocean. Lost contact, sir. Contact faded at 1,000 yards. Watson slams his fist against the bridge rail. The U-boat commander knows exactly what he's doing, drawing the escort out of position, creating gaps in the screen, then slipping past for an easy shot at the undefended merchantman. His wireless operator climbs to the bridge. Signal from Admiralty, sir. Convoy routing changes. Future sailings will be reduced to 30 to 35 ships to improve defensive efficiency. Smaller convoys. Watson stares at the message slip, feeling something twist in his gut. They're running smaller convoys, and somehow the losses keep increasing. Every captain he knows has the same bitter joke. The most dangerous place in the North Atlantic is the center of a British convoy. Acknowledge, he says finally. Another explosion. Starboard side now. The U-boats are coordinating, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Watson can chase one contact while another three slip through. It's like trying to defend a city with a single policeman. No matter how dedicated, no matter how skilled, the mathematics guarantee failure. He thinks about the convoy routes, the scattered formations, the desperate zigzagging of individual merchantmen trying to avoid torpedoes. There has to be a better way. The tactics they're using were developed in the last war, refined through hard experience. But this is a different war, with different technology, different numbers. Maybe what worked against a handful of U-boats in 1918 doesn't work against wolf packs of 8 or 12 submarines in 1942. But Watson is a corvette captain, not a strategist. He doesn't get to question doctrine or suggest alternatives. His job is to escort convoys using the tactics he's given, and to write casualty reports when those tactics fail. Another ship dies. Watson doesn't need to see the explosion to know what's happening. The orange glow on the horizon tells the story. That's the fourth ship tonight, and it's not yet midnight. November 30th, 1942. Admiralty House, London. The conference room is filled with men who've spent their lives at sea. Admiral Sir Max Houghton sits at the head of the table. Commander-in-Chief Weston approaches, the officer responsible for every convoy that crosses the Atlantic. Around him sit his staff officers, captains and commanders decorated with campaign ribbons, men who've commanded destroyers and cruisers, who've fought surface actions and hunted submarines. And at the opposite end of the table sits Patrick Blackett, a civilian in a rumpled suit, holding a briefcase full of graphs and calculations. "Gentlemen," Houghton begins, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in the Royal Navy. "Professor Blackett has requested this meeting to present findings from his operational research team. I'll be frank, there's skepticism about civilian involvement in tactical matters. But the professor's previous work on anti-aircraft gunnery proved valuable, so I've agreed to hear him out." "Professor." Blackett stands and opens his briefcase. He removes a series of charts and begins pinning them to the board behind him. Each chart shows convoy compositions, loss rates, statistical analyses. The precision is undeniable. This isn't guesswork or theory. This is data. "Admiral, gentlemen, I'll be direct. The current policy of reducing convoy size to improve defensive efficiency is having the opposite effect. Smaller convoys are experiencing significantly higher loss rates than larger convoys with the same escort ratio. The mathematical relationship is clear and the evidence is overwhelming." A captain near the end of the table, Harris, a destroyer squadron commander, leans back in his chair. "Professor, with respect, convoy size has been successfully reduced to minimize target profile. Basic geometry suggests a smaller formation is harder to detect." "Captain Harris, detection rates don't support that assumption." Blackett taps the first chart. "I've analyzed 18 months of convoy data. Large convoys and small convoys are detected at virtually identical rates. The U-boats find them regardless of size. What differs is the outcome after detection." He moves to the next chart, one that shows convoy perimeters relative to ship counts. A convoy's defensive perimeter increases with the square root of the number of ships. A convoy of 64 ships has only twice the perimeter of a convoy of 16 ships. But it has 4 times as many ships inside that perimeter. Another officer speaks up. "Surely a larger convoy presents more targets." "More targets, yes. But proportionally fewer vulnerable ones." Blackett's voice gains intensity. "In a small convoy, most ships are near the perimeter, within immediate reach of a U-boat that penetrates the screen. In a large convoy, the majority of ships are deep within the formation, protected by the sheer mass of vessels around them. A U-boat must expose herself much longer to reach high-value targets." He pins up the most damning chart, a direct comparison of loss rates. 30-ship convoys, 12.8% losses when attacked. 60-ship convoys with the same escort ratio, 5.7% losses. The difference is statistically significant and operationally decisive. The room is silent now. Numbers are harder to argue with than theory. Houghton leans forward, studying the charts. "You're suggesting we've been doing exactly the wrong thing." "Yes, Admiral. And the sooner we reverse course, the sooner we stop losing ships unnecessarily." Professor, another officer says carefully, consolidating convoys means fewer sailings. Delays for assembly. Increased turnaround time in port. These factors have operational consequences. Fewer sailings with the same total number of ships, Blackett counters. And those consequences are vastly outweighed by the reduction in losses. Every ship that doesn't sail because she's waiting for convoy assembly is a ship that isn't sunk. We're measuring operational efficiency by the wrong metrics. The question isn't how quickly we can move ships across the Atlantic. It's how many arrive intact. Admiral Horton stands and walks to the charts. He studies them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The other officers watch him, waiting. In this room, his word is law. The U-boat threat is increasing, Horton says finally. Donitz is building submarines faster than we can sink them. If present trends continue, we lose the Battle of the Atlantic by spring. If you're telling me we can halve our losses by changing convoy composition, Professor, then I need to understand why this wasn't obvious from the start. Because, Admiral, the naval officers making these decisions were thinking about tactics, about detection ranges and escort positioning and defensive maneuvers. They weren't thinking about mathematics. The relationship between perimeter and area isn't intuitive. It requires analysis. Horton turns to face him. How quickly can we implement this? Blackett hadn't expected immediate acceptance. He'd prepared for resistance, for arguments, for the institutional inertia of military bureaucracy. Immediately, sir. The next convoys can be assembled at larger size. No new equipment required, no special training. Simply concentrate the available merchantmen into fewer, larger formations. Objections. Horton looks around the table. Captain Harris clears his throat. Admiral, I have concerns about port congestion if we're assembling larger convoys. Liverpool and the Clyde have limited capacity for ship movements. Then we solve the port congestion problem, Captain. We don't reject a tactical improvement because it creates logistical challenges. Horton's tone brooks no argument. Professor, I want a written report with specific recommendations. Optimal convoy size, escort ratios, implementation timeline. On my desk by Friday. Yes, Admiral. And Professor. Horton meets his eyes. If you're right about this, you'll have saved thousands of lives. If you're wrong, we'll have wasted time and resources we cannot afford. The stakes are clear. Perfectly clear, Admiral. As the meeting breaks up, officers file out, some looking thoughtful, others skeptical. Blackett remains, organizing his charts. Commander Wynne approaches, a slight smile on his tired face. You did it, Wynne says quietly. You actually convinced them. Convinced Horton, Blackett corrects. The rest will follow orders. But yes, I hope we can make this work. How long until we see results? Blackett considers. If we start immediately, if the implementation is aggressive, if the convoys assemble without major delays. 4 months. Maybe 5. By March or April, we should see significant changes in loss rates. And if it doesn't work? Then I've killed my career and possibly helped lose the war. Blackett closes his briefcase. But the mathematics are sound, Commander. The relationship between convoy size and survival rate isn't a matter of opinion. It's geometry. And geometry doesn't lie. Outside, the November rain falls on London. In Liverpool, convoy assemblers are already receiving new orders: assemble larger formations, wait for more ships, ignore the pressure to sail quickly. At sea, U-boats continue their hunt, unaware that the mathematics of their hunting ground are about to shift against them. The Battle of the Atlantic is far from over. But the equation has changed. December 9, 1942. Liverpool docks. Captain Michael Reynolds stands on the bridge wing of SS Empire Crescent, watching the chaos of convoy assembly with growing frustration. His ship has been sitting at anchor for 3 days waiting for stragglers, and the harbour master keeps adding more vessels to the formation. 47 ships now, with rumours of another dozen joining before departure. This is madness, his first officer mutters beside him. We should have sailed on the 7th. Now we're burning coal at anchor, losing time, while the Admiralty plays mathematical games. Reynolds has heard the grumbling from every captain in the anchorage. The old system was simply assemble 30 ships, sail on schedule, repeat. Now they're being told to wait for larger formations, that some professor has convinced the brass that bigger is safer. It goes against every instinct Reynolds has developed in 3 years of convoy warfare. Bigger targets. More ships clustered together. Slower assembly times. But orders are orders. Signal from Harbour Master, sir. The wireless operator hands him the message slip. Convoy HX-219 will consist of 63 merchantmen with 6 escorts. Departure tomorrow, 6 o'clock hours, pending weather. 63 ships. Reynolds has never sailed in a convoy that large. He walks to the chart table and studies the formation diagram that came with the sailing orders. The convoy will steam in 9 columns, 7 ships per column, with escorts positioned at the front, rear, and flanks. The formation stretches nearly 3 miles from stem to stern, 2 miles from port to starboard. At least we'll have 6 escorts, the first officer says, trying to find the positive. That's better than the 3 we had last month. Reynolds nods slowly. 6 escorts for 63 ships versus 3 escorts for 35 ships. The ratio is actually worse. But according to the new tactical doctrine hastily distributed to all convoy commodores, their escorts will maintain tighter spacing around the perimeter. 1 escort every 2 miles instead of 1 every 3 or 4 miles. He hopes the professor is right. December 15, 1942. Mid-Atlantic. The Wolf Pack finds them on the 3rd day out, just as darkness falls. Commander Heinrich Lehrmann Willenbrock watches through U-96 periscope as the massive convoy plows eastward through moderate seas. He counts the columns, estimates the size, and feels his pulse quicken. This is the largest target his boat has encountered in months. 60, maybe 70 ships, he says to his first watch officer. Formation depth is extraordinary. They're packed tight. More targets means more opportunities, Herr Kalu. Lehrmann Willenbrock lowers the periscope and studies his charts. His Wolf Pack consists of 8 U-boats, coordinated by BDU U-Boat Command in Lorient. Standard tactics call for surface attacks at night, multiple boats hitting simultaneously from different angles to overwhelm the escorts. Signal the pack, he orders. Large convoy. Position marked. All boats attack at 9 p.m. hours. We'll hit them from the northwest while U-552 and U-403 come in from the southeast. Overwhelm the screen. The attack begins precisely on schedule. 3 U-boats surge forward on the surface, using their diesel engines to outpace the lumbering merchantmen. Lehrmann Willenbrock expects the escorts to scatter, each chasing a different contact, leaving gaps in the screen. But something is different tonight. HMS Vanek, one of the convoy's destroyer escorts, immediately turns toward U-96 position. But she doesn't chase blindly into the darkness. Instead, she maintains position along the convoy's flank, forcing Lehrmann Willenbrock to either expose his boat to attack or break off the approach. Destroyer closing. Range 3,000 meters. Lehrmann Willenbrock curses and orders a crash dive. By the time U-96 reaches periscope depth, the convoy has altered course slightly, the escorts have tightened their formation, and his attack angle is lost. He watches through the periscope as the massive formation steams past, the merchantman so tightly packed that he can barely see water between columns. Prepare tubes 1 and 2. We'll take a shot at the flank column. But the shot is difficult. The convoy's depth means that even if his torpedoes hit the outer column, they'll only reach 3 or 4 ships before the rest of the formation steams away. In the smaller convoys he's been attacking, penetrating the screen gave immediate access to most of the vessels. This formation is different layers of ships protecting each other. U-96 fires 2 torpedoes. One misses completely. The other strikes a merchantman in the convoy's 7th column deep within the formation, a lucky shot. 1 ship. By the time Lehrmann Willenbrock reloads, destroyers are racing toward his position. Depth charges begin to fall. He takes U-96 deep and slips away, frustrated. 8 U-boats attacked this convoy for 3 hours and sank exactly 4 ships. Against the smaller convoys they've been hunting, for hits usually meant 8 or 10 ships destroyed as the torpedoes found multiple targets in the compressed formations. Something has changed in the Atlantic mathematics. January 23, 1943. Derby House, Liverpool. Blackett spreads the latest convoy reports across the conference table. 7 weeks since implementation of the new doctrine. 7 weeks of larger convoys sailing with concentrated escort screens. The numbers are starting to tell a story. December convoys, he says, pointing to the summary sheet. 4 large convoys attacked, total 237 ships, 12 lost. Loss rate, 5.1%. Compared to November, 8 small convoys attacked, total 264 ships, 38 lost. Loss rate, 14.4%. Commander Wynne leans over the table, studying the figures. January's even better. 3 convoys attacked so far, 178 ships, 6 lost. 3.4%. The trend is clear. Blackett pulls out his notebook, already filling with new calculations. But we need more data before we can call this conclusive. The U-boat dispositions varied, weather was a factor, and we've also improved escort tactics independently of convoy size. The captains are still complaining, Wynne says. Longer assembly times, port congestion, delayed sailings. I've had 3 formal objections from convoy commodores arguing that we're sacrificing operational flexibility. And how many ships did those commodores lose last month? None. Convoy HX-221, 61 ships, not attacked. Convoy SC-114, 57 ships, 2 lost despite 6 hours of attacks. Convoy ON-154. Wynne trails off. ON-154 had been a disaster, a 45-ship convoy that lost 14 vessels in a running battle that lasted 2 days. But the analysis showed that ON-154 sailed before the new escort tactics were fully implemented, and the escorts made critical errors in defensive positioning. There will be failures, Blackett says quietly.
No tactical doctrine guarantee survival.
But if we can reduce average losses from 12% to 5%, we save hundreds of ships over a year. Thousands of lives. Millions of tons of cargo. Admiral Horton enters the room, and both men stand. The Admiral waves them down and studies the reports himself, his weathered face impassive. The Americans are skeptical, Horton says finally. Admiral King believes our larger convoys are simply more difficult to assemble and that any improvement in loss rates is coincidental. He wants to maintain smaller, more frequent sailings on the western routes. Blackett feels something cold settle in his stomach. The Americans are now fully engaged in the Atlantic battle, providing escorts and merchantmen. If they refuse to adopt the new doctrine, if they continue running small convoys, Admiral King is wrong, Blackett says flatly. The mathematics don't care about skepticism. Every small convoy he runs will lose proportionally more ships than necessary. I agree, Professor. But convincing an American admiral that a British physicist knows better than his own staff requires more than 2 months of data. We need overwhelming proof. A clear, undeniable demonstration that large convoys survive and small convoys die. Then we need to track every convoy for the next 3 months, Blackett says. Large versus small, British versus American, all routes. Build a data set so comprehensive that even the most skeptical admiral cannot argue with the results. Horton nods. Make it happen. And Professor, we're already seeing results in the shipping statistics. Cargo delivered is up 17% despite no increase in sailings. You were right about the mathematics. Now convince the Americans before they learn the hard way. February 17, 1943. 400 miles south of Greenland. Convoy HX-226 plows through heavy seas. 68 merchantmen arranged in 11 columns, 7 escorts forming a protective screen. On the bridge of the convoy flagship SS Marwick Head, Commodore Reginald Hall watches the formation maintained station despite 20-foot swells and poor visibility. This is his 4th convoy under the new doctrine, and Hall is starting to understand what the operational research people were talking about. The formation is large and unwieldy, but there's a solidity to it that smaller convoys lacked. When a ship drops back with engine trouble, she doesn't immediately become isolated and vulnerable. The convoy's depth means she has 20 or 30 vessels still around her, still part of the protected formation. U-boat contact, bearing 185, range 4,000 yards. The signal comes from HMS Fame, one of the escort destroyers. Hall watches through binoculars as Fame turns toward the contact, but she doesn't charge off into the darkness like escorts used to do. Instead, she maintains position at the convoy's rear quarter, forcing the U-boat to either attack through her or go around. 2 corvettes adjust position to cover the gap Fame created, maintaining the defensive screen's integrity. All ships, emergency turn 15 degrees to starboard on my signal. Hall orders via signal lamp and radio. The massive formation begins to turn, 68 ships executing a coordinated course change that shifts the entire convoy away from the U-boat's attack position. In smaller convoys, such a turn would expose the flanks, creating gaps. But this formation is so large that even during the turn, most ships remain surrounded by other vessels. The U-boat commander has to penetrate through 7 columns to reach the convoy center. 700 yards of ships, each one a potential collision hazard, each one blocking his approach. Fame drops depth charges. The ASDIC operator reports the contact fading, possibly damaged, definitely driven deep. The convoy steams on. Over the next 6 hours, U-boats make 3 more attempts to penetrate the screen. Each time, the escorts respond with coordinated maneuvers, maintaining their defensive positions while driving off the attackers. The convoy loses 1 ship A-tanker in the 3rd column hit by a long-range shot. 1 ship from 68. Hall writes his after-action report in the wardroom that night, and finds himself adding a paragraph he wouldn't have written 3 months ago. The concentration of ships in large convoy formation proved decisive in deterring sustained U-boat attacks. Enemy submarines attempting to penetrate the screen found themselves faced with multiple columns of vessels, limiting their maneuverability and increasing detection risk. Escorts maintained superior defensive positioning compared to previous operations with smaller convoys. Recommend continued emphasis on large convoy formations. He signs the report and seals it for transmission to Derby House. Somewhere in Liverpool, Professor Blackett will add this convoy to his statistics, one more data point in the mathematical proof that larger convoys survive. March 8, 1943. U-boat headquarters, Lorient, France. Admiral Karl Donitz studies the operational reports from his wolfpacks with growing concern. The patterns have shifted in the Atlantic. The large convoys his boats are encountering formations of 60 or 70 ships are proving remarkably resistant to attack. The problem is penetration, says Captain Gott, his chief of staff. Our boats are finding the convoys easily enough. But getting through the escort screen to reach the merchantman has become significantly more difficult. The escorts maintain tighter spacing. When one moves to engage, others immediately fill the gap. Donitz picks up a reconnaissance photograph showing a British convoy taken by a Condor patrol aircraft. The ships stretch across miles of ocean, packed into a formation so dense that individual vessels are barely distinguishable. And when our boats do penetrate, God continues, they're finding that most ships are too far inside the formation to reach safely. We're getting 1 or 2 kills per attack instead of the 4 or 5 we were achieving against the smaller convoys. They've changed their tactics, Donitz says. The British are consolidating. Fewer convoys, but each one larger and more heavily defended. He walks to the wall map showing current U-boat positions. 50 boats are at sea, hunting in wolf packs across the major convoy routes. By all rights, they should be achieving record tonnage totals. The British have fewer escorts available, not more. The number of U-boats has increased. Yet the sinking rates are declining. Order the packs to focus on the smaller convoys, Donitz decides. American convoys on the western routes are still running formations of 30 to 40 ships. Easier targets. Better returns. If the British want to hide their merchantmen in massive formations, we'll sink the Americans instead. But even as he gives the order, Donitz recognizes what's happening. The British have found a mathematical advantage. They've discovered that concentrating their ships makes them harder to kill, not easier. And if the Americans learn the same lesson, the Battle of the Atlantic is becoming a battle of mathematics as much as torpedoes. March 20, 1943. Derby House, Liverpool. For months, Blackett says, laying the comprehensive report on Admiral Houghton's desk. 4 months of data across 63 convoys. The results are conclusive. Houghton opens the report and reads the executive summary. Convoys of 55-plus ships with proportional escort, average loss rate when attacked, 4.2%. Convoys of 30 to 40 ships with proportional escort, average loss rate when attacked, 11.7%. Ships saved by large convoy doctrine, December 1942 to March 1943, estimated 186 vessels. Cargo delivered, increased 23% despite 15% reduction in number of sailings. You've more than doubled survival rates, Houghton says quietly. Exactly as you predicted. The mathematics were always sound, Admiral. The challenge was proving it operationally. Blackett sits down, suddenly feeling the weight of 4 months of exhaustion. We've sent this report to the Admiralty and to Allied Convoy Command. The Americans are still running smaller formations, and they're losing ships at the old rates. If Admiral King can be convinced King is already convinced, Houghton interrupts. This report will force his hand. The U.S. Navy cannot justify higher loss rates when the solution is this simple. We've given them proof that cannot be argued with. He closes the report and looks directly at Blackett. Professor, do you understand what you've accomplished? You've taken the single most important naval campaign of this war and fundamentally changed its mathematics. You've saved more ships in 4 months than most admirals save in their entire careers. You've proven that operational research civilian analysis applied to military problems can be decisive. I solved an equation, Admiral. The Royal Navy implemented the solution. You solved an equation that no one else saw. You challenged doctrine that had stood for 20 years. And you were right. Houghton stands and extends his hand. On behalf of every merchant sailor who'll make it home because of your work, Professor, thank you. The handshake is firm, a warrior acknowledging a scholar, 2 men from different worlds united by the same goal, winning a war against mathematics, geometry, and time. Outside, another convoy is assembling in Liverpool Harbour. 67 ships this time, the largest yet. In 4 days they'll sail into the Atlantic, protected by escorts positioned according to new tactical doctrines, their survival probability calculated to 3 decimal places, their lives saved by a physicist who understood that sometimes the difference between death and survival is nothing more than the square root of the number of ships in formation. The mathematics don't lie. And the Atlantic is learning that lesson, 1 convoy at a time. April 22, 1943. 600 miles west of Ireland. Dawn breaks over convoy ON5, and Commander Peter Gretton stands on the bridge of HMS Duncan, counting ships. 43 merchantmen departed Liverpool. Through 5 days of the heaviest U-boat attacks he's experienced in 2 years of convoy duty, 41 remain. 2 lost. 2 out of 43. It should have been a massacre. 30 U-boats found them on day 2, the largest Wolfpack concentration of the war. Admiral Donitz threw everything he had at this convoy, determined to prove that British tactical changes wouldn't save them. For 3 days and nights, submarines attacked from every angle, coordinating their strikes, overwhelming the escorts with sheer numbers. And they killed 2 ships. Gretton lowers his binoculars and studies the formation still steaming in disciplined columns despite the exhaustion of every crew. Under the old doctrine, this convoy would have sailed with 30 ships, maybe 3 escorts. The U-boats would have torn through it like wolves through a scattered flock. 10 ships lost, maybe 15. Instead, the convoy's size and the concentrated escort screen created a defensive geometry that even 30 U-boats couldn't penetrate effectively. Signal from Admiralty, sir. His communications officer hands him the message slip. Well done, Duncan. Your convoy's survival confirms new tactical doctrine. Admiral Houghton sends his personal congratulations. Gretton reads the message twice. Personal congratulations from the Commander-in-Chief. For losing only 2 ships out of 43. 6 months ago, such a loss rate would have been considered miraculous. Now it's becoming the expectation. Reply, mission accomplished. Proceeding to Liverpool. All crews performed exceptionally. He walks to the chart table and makes a notation in the convoy log. ON5 survival will become another data point in Professor Blackett's statistical analysis. Another proof that the mathematics work. Another convoy that arrived intact because someone understood geometry better than tradition. HMS Vedette, one of his corvette escorts, pulls alongside, her deck crew waving. They've been at action stations for 72 hours straight, dropping depth charges, driving off U-boats, maintaining the defensive screen through fatigue that makes men hallucinate. But they're alive, their convoy is alive, and that's what matters. Secure from action stations. Gretton orders. Set normal watch. All ships, maintain formation. We'll be home in 2 days. Home. 41 ships making port. Thousands of tons of food, fuel, ammunition, and vehicles reaching Britain. And below them in the Atlantic depths, at least 4 U-boats that won't be making it back to Lorient, driven down by depth charges, sunk by the coordinated defense that large convoys make possible. The mathematics are working. The equation has shifted. May 15, 1943. Combined Operations Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Admiral Ernest King sits across from the British liaison officer, Captain Harry Hopkins, studying the comprehensive report that's been classified most secret. 4 months of convoy data, analysed by British operational research, showing loss rates that King initially refused to believe. Large convoy doctrine, King says finally, his voice carefully neutral. You're telling me we've been losing ships unnecessarily because our convoys are too small? Yes, Admiral. The data is conclusive. British convoys have cut losses by more than half since implementing concentrated formations. Meanwhile, American convoys running smaller formations continue experiencing loss rates of 10 to 12% when attacked. King turns to the statistical summary. The numbers are damning. Convoy UGS-6, 38 ships, 11 lost. Convoy ABU-15, 42 ships, 9 lost. Both American convoys, both running smaller formations with inadequate escort spacing, both torn apart by U-boat packs. The British professor, King says. Blackett. What's his background? Nobel laureate in physics, sir. Worked on cosmic ray research before the war. He's head of the Royal Navy's Operational Research Section now. His team has revolutionized several aspects of naval warfare, anti-aircraft gunnery, depth charge settings, and now convoy tactics. A physicist telling the Navy how to fight. King has spent his entire career at sea, commanded ships in combat, risen through experience and tactical acumen. The idea that some civilian with equations and slide rules could see what professional naval officers missed. It rankles. But the numbers don't lie. What's the British convoy loss rate now? 4 to 5% when attacked, Admiral. Down from 12 to 14% before doctrine change. And their cargo delivery rates are up 23% despite running fewer convoys. King closes the report and looks out the window at the Potomac River. Out there in the Atlantic, American merchantmen are dying because the US Navy is too proud to adopt British tactics. Sailors drowning because admirals won't admit that a mathematician saw something they missed. Draft new tactical guidance, King orders. All Atlantic convoys minimum 55 ships with proportional escort increase. Large convoy doctrine to be implemented within 30 days. I want convoy commodores retrained, assembly procedures revised, and port operations adjusted to handle larger formations. Yes, Admiral. And Captain? I want our own operational research teams established. If the British can use mathematics to win battles, so can we. Find me statisticians, mathematicians, physicists, anyone who can analyze combat data and find patterns we're missing. This war is being fought with torpedoes and guns, but it's being won with equations. Hopkins salutes and leaves. King sits alone, thinking about the strange nature of modern warfare. In previous wars, victory went to the side with better tactics, superior training, more aggressive commanders. Now victory is going to whoever understands the underlying mathematics of combat. The Navy is learning what scientists have always known. The universe runs on numbers, and those who understand the numbers control reality. He picks up the report again and finds the casualty estimates. If American convoys had adopted large formation doctrine 4 months earlier, approximately 140 ships would still be sailing. 4,000 merchant sailors would still be alive. Millions of tons of cargo would have reached their destinations. The price of institutional pride, calculated in lives and tonnage. Never again, King decides. The US Navy will learn from this. Will adapt. Will use every tool available, including mathematics, to win this war. June 3, 1943. U-boat headquarters, Lorient. Admiral Donitz reads the loss reports with something approaching disbelief. May has been catastrophic: 41 U-boats lost, nearly a quarter of his operational fleet. The tonnage totals are declining despite more boats at sea. The wolf packs that should be dominating the Atlantic are instead being hunted, driven down, destroyed by escorts that seem to be everywhere at once. It's the convoy concentrations, Captain Gott explains, pointing to the intelligence maps. The Allies are running formations of 60, 70, even 80 ships. Our boats find the convoys easily, but penetrating the escort screens has become nearly impossible. And when they do penetrate, they're facing such depth of formation that they can barely reach the interior ships. Donitz studies the maps showing convoy routes. Where 6 months ago he could plot 20 or 30 individual convoys at various points in the Atlantic, now there are perhaps a dozen massive formations, each one a fortress of ships protected by concentrated escorts. The mathematics have turned against us, he says quietly. They've discovered that consolidation improves survival. Fewer convoys means we can find them, but we can't kill them efficiently. And the escorts, they're coordinating better, maintaining tighter defensive patterns. Orders, Herr Admiral. Donitz considers his options. The U-boat war was always a numbers game: sink ships faster than the Allies can build them, force Britain to surrender through starvation and isolation. But the equation has changed. The Allies are delivering more cargo with fewer convoys, losing fewer ships per sailing, and building new vessels faster than Germany can sink them. The mathematics no longer favor the hunter. Pull back from the North Atlantic routes, Donitz orders. Redeploy to areas where convoys are smaller: the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Gibraltar routes. We cannot win a battle of attrition against concentrated formations and improved escort tactics. We find easier targets or we lose the war at sea. It's an admission of defeat, though Donitz won't phrase it that way in his report to the Führer. The U-boats haven't been beaten by superior technology or overwhelming force. They've been beaten by geometry, by a mathematical insight that changed the fundamental equation of convoy warfare. Somewhere in England, a physicist with a slide rule has done what depth charges and destroyers couldn't. He's turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. July 10, 1943. Derby House, Liverpool. The operations room is quieter than it's been in 2 years. The plotting table still shows convoy positions and U-boat contacts, but the density of activity has decreased dramatically. Fewer convoys at sea, but each one larger, more heavily defended, surviving attacks that would have destroyed them 8 months ago. Blackett stands before the master chart showing monthly shipping losses. The curve that had been climbing steadily since 1940, reaching horrifying peaks in late 1942, has reversed. December, 262,000 tons lost. January, 203,000 tons. February, 359,000 tons. A spike that caused panic until analysis showed it was primarily small convoys still using old doctrine. March, 233,000 tons. April, 235,000 tons. May, 264,000 tons. June, 95,000 tons. The trend is unmistakable. The Battle of the Atlantic is turning. Remarkable, says Admiral Sir Max Horton, standing beside him. 8 months from theory to operational victory. The U-boats are withdrawing from the main convoy routes. Donitz has effectively conceded that he cannot defeat concentrated formations with available forces. The mathematics were always going to favor defense once we understood the relationship between perimeter and interior, Blackett says. The U-boat's advantage was tactical surprise and the ability to overwhelm scattered escorts. Large convoys eliminate both advantages. Horton picks up a folder from the conference table reports from across the Allied command structure. The Americans have fully adopted large convoy doctrine. The Canadians are reorganizing their escort groups. Even the merchant captains who initially resisted are now requesting assignment to larger convoys. You've changed how the entire Allied naval establishment thinks about convoy defense. And more importantly, we're winning. Blackett points to the cargo delivery statistics. Britain is receiving 92% of projected supply tonnage, up from 63% last November. The food situation has stabilized. Fuel reserves are rebuilding. We're accumulating the material necessary for offensive operations. For the invasion of Europe, though he doesn't say it aloud. For the strategic bombing campaign. For the campaigns in North Africa and Italy and eventually France. All dependent on ships crossing the Atlantic, on convoys surviving, on cargo arriving intact. The Prime Minister wants to meet you, Houghton says. Churchill is fascinated by operational research. He wants to understand how a physicist accomplished what the entire Royal Navy struggled with for 3 years. Blackett shakes his head. The Royal Navy accomplished it, Admiral. I provided analysis. Your captains and crews implemented the tactics, fought the battles, saved the ships. Don't let Churchill turn this into a story about civilian genius outsmarting military tradition. It's a story about using every available tool including mathematics to win a war. Modesty from a man who changed history with equations. Houghton smiles slightly. But I'll convey your sentiments. Though I suspect the Prime Minister will insist on the meeting anyway. They stand together, watching the operations staff plot the current convoys. 6 major formations at sea, 427 ships total, all steaming safely across an Atlantic that claimed thousands of vessels in the dark years of 1941 and 1942. Each ship represents lives saved, cargo delivered, victories made possible. What's next for you, Professor? Houghton asks. The convoy problem is largely solved. Your team could be applied elsewhere. There are always problems to solve, Admiral. Anti-submarine warfare tactics still need refinement. Aircraft patrol patterns could be optimized. Mine warfare, landing operations, fleet logistics warfare generates endless problems that yield to mathematical analysis. Then we'll keep you busy. Houghton extends his hand. But for now, accept my gratitude. You took on a problem that the Navy considered insoluble, proved us wrong, and saved thousands of lives in the process. That's not modesty. That's achievement. Blackett accepts the handshake, feeling the weight of the moment. 8 months ago he stood in this same room, staring at a wall covered in pins marking dead ships, trying to convince skeptical admirals that he'd found a solution. Now the pins are fewer, the losses diminished, the tide turning. Not through superior firepower or technological breakthrough, but through understanding. Through recognizing that warfare follows mathematical laws just as surely as physics does. Through seeing patterns that others missed because they were looking at tactics instead of geometry. The Battle of the Atlantic isn't over. U-boats still hunt in the darkness. Ships still die. But the equation has shifted decisively in favor of survival. And that shift began with a physicist, a notebook, and the willingness to question assumptions that had stood unchallenged for 20 years. September 20th, 1943. North Atlantic. Lieutenant William Morrison stands on the bridge of SS Pacific Ranger, watching the convoy steam steadily eastward through calm seas. 72 ships arranged in 12 columns, 7 escorts maintaining a protective screen, the formation stretching across miles of ocean under clear skies. This is Morrison's 9th Atlantic crossing, and the contrast with his first voyage is staggering. That first convoy, in March 1942, consisted of 34 ships with 2 escorts. They lost 11 vessels in 3 days of attacks. Morrison spent 14 hours in a lifeboat before being rescued, watching oil fires burn on the water, listening to men scream for help that never came. He transferred to Pacific Ranger expecting more of the same. Instead, he's discovered that convoy duty has been transformed. The large formations, the concentrated escorts, the coordinated defensive tactic sits like sailing in a different war. They're still attacked. U-boats still find them. But now the attacks are driven off, the escorts maintain their positions, and ships arrive intact. Clear horizon, sir. The lookout reports from the crow's nest.
No contacts.
Morrison nods and makes a notation in the log. Another day closer to Liverpool. Another day of cargo delivered. Another day of survival. Below decks, in the cargo holds, sit 50 Sherman tanks destined for British armored divisions. Aircraft engines. Medical supplies. Grain. Steel. Rubber. The raw materials of warfare and survival, crossing 3,000 miles of ocean that used to be a killing ground. "We'll make it," says the first officer, joining him on the bridge wing. "This convoy will make it." Morrison doesn't answer immediately, but is thinking the same thing. The mathematics have changed. The geometry of survival has shifted. And somewhere in England, a man with equations and calculations has given merchant sailors like Morrison a fighting chance to see home again. The convoy steams on through the afternoon, 72 ships united by mathematics and protected by understanding. The Atlantic stretches to the horizon, still dangerous, still deadly, but no longer the graveyard it was. The numbers, finally, favor survival. Epilogue, November 1943. Admiralty House, London. The report on Patrick Blackett's desk carries the stamp "Most Secret" and contains statistics that will remain classified for decades. But the summary is simple enough. Period. December 1942 to October 1943. Large convoy doctrine implementation, complete across Allied operations. Average convoy size, increased from 38 ships to 64 ships. Average loss rate when attacked, reduced from 12.3% to 4.1%. Ships saved, estimated 647 vessels. Lives saved, estimated 8,200 merchant sailors. Strategic impact, critical. Britain's supply situation stabilized. Invasion preparations proceeding on schedule. U-boat threat contained. Blackett reads the numbers without emotion, though behind each statistic lie human stories: sailors who came home, ships that arrived intact, families who didn't receive death notifications. The mathematics don't capture those individual victories, but they confirm what he proved 8 months ago, that understanding the geometry of convoy defense could save lives on an unprecedented scale. There's a knock on his door. Commander Wynne enters, carrying another folder. "The Americans want your team's help with Pacific operations," Wynne says. "Logistics analysis for island hopping campaigns. The mathematical optimization of supply chains across 7,000 miles of ocean. Another problem to solve." Blackett closes the report and stands. Outside his window, London continues its wartime routine: rationing, blackouts, air raid drills. But the city is better fed than it was a year ago. The docks are busier. The strategic situation has improved. Because someone questioned assumptions. Because someone applied mathematics to tactics. Because someone understood that the square root of 64 is 8, and that relationship between perimeter and interior space could mean the difference between life and death. "Tell the Americans we'll help," Blackett says. "War generates problems. Mathematics solves them. That's what we do." He picks up his briefcase and walks out of the office, just another civilian in a building full of uniforms, a physicist among warriors, a man whose weapon was understanding and whose battlefield was a notebook filled with equations. Behind him, on the wall of the operations room, the Atlantic chart shows 6 convoys at sea. 412 ships total. All steaming safely toward their destinations, protected by the mathematics of survival, saved by the realization that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is nothing more than understanding geometry better than your enemy. The Battle of the Atlantic continues. But the mathematics, finally, favor the Allies. And in warfare, as in physics, mathematics always wins.